Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, March 28th, 2023. Time for another show. These things keep coming. I don't know. We seem to do these just about every day, and it's a weekday, and so here we go. Also, by the way, just to put a lighthearted spin on things, it's a weekday, and so therefore we are now under the cloud of a mass shooting. It was pointed out to me via email yesterday. Jeremy Freiberger just dropping me a line to remind me, hey, you forgot to mention yesterday that we were starting the day under the cloud of a mass shooting. And as it turns out, of course, the chronology was such that we had not started the day under a cloud of a mass shooting. But before the show was over, we were, but we just didn't know that we were under the cloud of a mass shooting. The news of the mass shooting didn't reach the mass media news market until after the show. Of course, you all know that we're talking about the school shooting in Nashville yesterday. And yes, we are operating under that cloud. We're almost always, of course, as a matter of just pure fact, operating under the cloud of a mass shooting because there's one at least every day. But only a select few make the news. The ones that we say never again to, but then never actually do anything to, do anything about starting never again. And I mean, wow, we've been over this territory a lot. I don't know all that much about the facts on the ground of this one. This one's sort of slow developing. And I don't know. I don't know whether it has to do with my view of these things or the news media's view of these things, but this one doesn't seem to have sparked the same sort of immediate, in-depth inquiry into everything that's going on and dissecting all of the facts on the ground. And I don't know whether that's, like I said, I don't know whether that's me or just or the media in general. So I don't know yet whether that's indicative of my fatigue with these things, media fatigue, societal fatigue with these. I'm not supposed to get fatigued by these things, but it's kind of hard not to. The Republican talking point of the too many doors issue is back on this one again. I don't know whether Republican officialdom is picking up on this one again or not, but I happened to see yesterday afternoon news clips circulated by the usual suspects on the usual bird sites about Fox News commentators, right in the middle of everything, before anything is known about what was going on, or certainly before we got to anything about how the crime could have, taken place and been executed, right before our very eyes. There was a Fox News reporter, commentator, I don't know who it is, but who was already floating the too many doors, one of the doors left open kind of thing, and actually said, we see this as a repeated theme. This keeps happening at these schools, et cetera, et cetera. It's bizarre that they keep going back to this. And it's funny, I thought that had originated in the wake of the Uvalde shooting, where it was reported early on that apparently a door had either been left propped open or otherwise was unlocked. And there were various explanations for why that might be. But that led to the bizarro talking point, Ted Cruz and others bringing up, if there were only one door in and out of the schools and it was properly locked, then none of this would have happened. But of course, then we would have a tragic fire incident instead of a gunfire incident. And I don't know, the doors, obviously, I think a huge red herring. But apparently that surfaced again yesterday. And then somebody pointed out to me, it's actually a relatively old Republican school shooting talking point and goes back to another Texas shooting prior to Uvalde, Santa Fe, and that this too was occasion for then, and I guess still, Lieutenant Governor, whatever the hell his name is down in Texas, doing the too many doors talking point. It's amazing how long they hold on to their really super stupid talking points in this and pretty much every area. I was just over the weekend, I think, observing that it was being circulated on Twitter and doubtless elsewhere in social media that Lauren Boebert, I wouldn't even report this as news, but Lauren Boebert calling for the elimination of the Federal Department of Education, which I guess gets you headlines locally. Why it should get you headlines nationally, I don't know, except it's here goes Lauren Boebert again. But the elimination of the Federal Department of Education has been on the Republican list for candidates in a box for probably going on 50 years now. I only remember it personally going back about, I don't know, I guess about 30 years. I mean, it was certainly a Gingrich era talking point as well. But I think even at that point, it was probably some 20 plus years old. And it probably stems originally from post Brown v. Board of Education, where they said, well, if we can't stop desegregation, we should defund and eliminate the Federal Department of Education at the very least because reasons. This is happening in schools, and therefore, it must have something to do with the Federal Department of Education, which is not entirely clear, but that seems to be a favorite talking point among Republicans. And I just thought I'd bring that up because Lauren Boebert really, pulled a dusty clip off the shelf for her candidate in a box appearance for the day, and it was really quite ridiculous. Let's see. I happened to notice as I was coming in, Justice Putnam sent his usual acknowledgement notes indicating that everything was fine, and he usually hints at what's on his mind for the day in roundabout way in giving me the thumbs up that everything's fine. Let's see. We have I'll check out on this one. Usually they're a little cryptic, and but I know what he's talking about. And sometimes it reveals a whole new angle of inquiry. Let's see. There's maybe it was the KGB who pushed Ivanka down the stairs after all. Oh, okay. Do we mean Ivana? Ivanka's mom? Okay. KGB, could be. I don't know. Not sure what's happening here. Ivanka was herself was back in the news for reasons unknown to me. I couldn't find time to click on the clickbait. Ivana. Okay, we are back to Ivana. Ivana did fall down the stairs, I think, didn't she? And so it could be the KGB, but I don't know why. So maybe you want to, if you got an article, certainly you can share it with us. This one I haven't picked up on. But usually these days, of course, they go by different initials and throw people out windows. And then there was this other one. The one that caught my eye here was Ted Cruz's staffer who posts the mass shooting condolences. I say it here and it comes up there. Ted Cruz's staffer who posts the mass shooting condolences must have worked at ALEC. Yes. I mean, that could certainly be it. These guys just kind of respond to, at this point it has to become a rote response because mass shootings themselves are a rote response to the easy availability of guns and high levels of, economic anxiety mixed together in a volatile mix out there in the rest of the country. What's the Ivana story here? Newly declassified files reveal FBI called for a preliminary something, and then, it cuts off. So I got to open it up and find out. It's raw story. Gideon Rubin reporting under the headline that the FBI was calling for a preliminary inquiry into Ivana Trump, according to a report. Okay. You got my interest. I don't know. Let's see. We can find out. It's not going to take us forever to figure out what's up. The FBI on Monday released internal documents the agency kept on former President Donald Trump's first wife, Ivana Trump. Bloomberg News reports. The files were classified as secret, and which of course means that Donald had them somewhere, probably in tucked inside TV Guide or something like that. Ivana Trump died from a fall in July at her New York home. She was 73. This much we are aware of. The FBI, in response to a Freedom of Information Act request from Bloomberg News, wonder what made them even want to go sniffing around here. Oh, by the way, I just want to point out that while I have Raw Story open here, and they have the little sidebar with all the different stories that they've got, I can see stories listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's more, but there are 6 that fit on the screen stories that they're teasing. 3 of them feature pictures of murdery Trader Green. In case, you're wondering, are we giving her too much attention? And, I know that's, it's a point of some contention about whether or not, you can't really black her out or anything. So I'm agnostic when it comes to whether or not you ignore her or tell everybody exactly what she's saying every day so that you never lose track of her. Anyway, back to Ivana Trump. In response to a Freedom of Information Act request from Bloomberg, there were 190 pages of the 900 pages that were located were actually released, and the agency said it will release the rest of the documents next month. They had to, probably spray paint them all gold first before they could get released. Let's see. Oh, and by the way, I didn't take a look yet at what is she complaining about, but I guess the one that's being promoted here is murdery Trader Green blames Biden and other gun grabbers for the Nashville school shooting. So that's another good one. Remember, of course, that it used to be their claim that these shootings happened where you kicked God out of schools. But, of course, this being a Christian school, the answer must be doors and Biden. They really just never tire of offering these excuses. Anyway, the FBI keeps files that include information developed from multiple sources, including news clippings and interview summaries that for privacy reasons are withheld from public view while the person is still living, but the privacy rights end after the person's death. I guess that's what prompted Bloomberg to do that. They have FOIA people on hand, I guess, who know these things and say, that might be interesting. Let's make that request. It takes a while to get the answer and take even longer to get the full answer with all of the redactions revealed, if that ever happens, I guess. All right, let's see. The FBI, in a document dated on February 14th, 1989, one of the declassified documents, I guess, said it recommended a preliminary inquiry be opened on Ivana Trump based on information a confidential source provided to the agency, the report said, maybe because she was Czech. 89, well, there was a volatile time there in Eastern Europe. According to the report, the document said it is unknown if the allegations stem from jealousies of her wealth and fame. Investigations continuing. The FBI redacted the contents of the inquiry. According to the 1990 file, the FBI sought a man with ties to Czechoslovakian intelligence. Ties, used twice in this sentence, who arranged fictitious marriages and who was believed to have a connection to Ivana Trump, who was also born in Czechoslovakia. Okay, so it's interesting. The fictitious marriage thing, I guess, is a harmless sort of a terminology that's hung on it. But it is, at minimum, it is a violation of immigration laws. But I guess we don't really care what Ivana Trump thought about immigration, but we care more about what Donald Trump thinks about immigration, and they're divorced, so I don't know. But at any rate, that's sort of interesting. Illustrative of their hypocrisy, certainly. Everybody else, brown people are illegal immigrants. White European people have, fictitious marriages, but, that's just because they want to come here to the United States and work hard and make a new life for themselves. And then divorce the person that they married to get a green card and yada, yada, but that's all on the up and up. The brown people are really bugging us. There could be that. Now, that's the most benign possible spin on the reality of what underlies the fictitious marriages. The other one, of course, is human trafficking. And in both cases, of course, that would make the Trumps huge hypocrites, and so therefore perfectly good Republicans in good standing, and there's really no need to go forward with this investigation. For our investigation. The FBI can do what it likes. Let's see. Ivana, of course, married the Donald Trump, then a budding real estate developer in 1977, but there's a pop-up ad for buying silver bars that's in the way of my reading the rest of that paragraph. Is there more that we need to uncover? I'm just sort of curious what other sorts of things they might reveal for us. No, let's see. Then they go through his marriage history and his divorcing her and marrying Marla Maples next. And that's all. And then he divorces her, of course, before he gets around to marrying Melania, who is also Eastern European. And boy, oh boy, they probably ought to be investigating Donald Trump for a lot of things. All right, now, back to the modern day, I guess, and talking about live people, and there are many that we will want to look into. Let's see. I don't want to linger too long necessarily on the Nashville shooting, but at least just to get the, actual story on record without diving too far into it. I guess the thing to look out for, or things to look out for. One, of course, the too many doors meme. Second, steering away from the fact that it was, in fact, a Christian stool. Christian stool, sure, but Christian school more appropriately. And it's known as the Covenant School. Super, satanic and all that, obviously. Anyway, what can I tell you? The shooter is named, and interestingly, a woman shooter, I think. I'm just not clear on this, because what we really have to look out for here, just in case you haven't heard it, the real heads up is, a 28-year-old shooter who actually, I think it's now established, was previously a student at this school. So police kind of speculating that maybe they have some, she left behind some writings. Now we have to look at a manifesto, etc., and try and figure out what was going on. And that will just drag this out even further. But so some indication that there might be some resentment at having attended this school, which, I can imagine any number of reasons why someone would resent, school in general, or a strict Christian school type upbringing. It can happen. But there's also, again, the warning here is that this shooter may have identified at some point as transgender, either now or in the past. It's unclear. It's unclear in which direction we're talking, so that I don't know whether this is the news coverage respecting the transition and identifying the shooter as female, or is it the news media rejecting the idea of transition and identifying this shooter by birth, gender, or whether there was some indication of interest in transitioning, but then decided not to. I don't know what the history is, but there's a transgender element there, and I don't know whether it's there organically or being forced in from the outside. That's why I want to sort of raise the red flag. There's every possibility that this was somebody who was interested themselves in a transition of some kind at some point. There's also every indication that it could be, once this person expressed some interest and then changed their mind, and now forever after, now that, of course, she's been involved in this horrific shooting, and the right wing needs excuses not to blame it on their precious guns or anything like that, they'll try and blame it on the transgender issue, even if it really had nothing to do with it and might not have been at play in this person's psyche for several years. I don't know. I don't think the news stories at this point are able to unravel that. Whether or not that unravels or becomes clearer in the coming days, I don't know. I don't think it's really a great idea to focus on. But there it is. And you're, in order to be able to analyze what's happening in the news, I think you're going to need to know about that and what information we have and what might be swirling around it. Okay. Let's see. By way of establishing what information is available on the shooting, I offer you the NBC News take on it. Shooting at Nashville Christian School leaves 3 children and 3 adults dead, officials say. 28-year-old shooter with 2 semi-automatic weapons and a handgun. And my guess is that the handgun itself was also semi-automatic, but they don't really necessarily know what they're talking about. And semi-automatic weapons is what you can get by the editors at this point. And in all likelihood, I mean, most of the reporting I heard was that they were, in fact, 2 assault rifles, whether they were AR-15s or derivatives, or whether she went the AK-47 route or something else. I don't know. Let's see. So 2 semi-automatic weapons and a handgun opened fire inside the Covenant School. The school serves preschool to 6th grade. That's according to the subheader on the article here. David K. Lee and Natalie Obregon are on the byline for NBC News. A heavily armed former student shot through a locked school door before killing 3 children and 3 staff members at a private Christian campus in Nashville on Monday, authorities said. So I guess the unlocked door story was just a red herring and false information coming through, doubtless, of course, thanks to Fox opening the door, no pun intended to that talking point. In addition to the 3 9-year-old students, the 28-year-old attacker fatally wounded a custodian, a substitute teacher, and the head of the school before being killed by responding officers, according to Metropolitan Nashville Police Chief John Drake. They named the shooter. Do you care? I mean, the name is the name. You've probably seen it by now. I guess I might as well make an effort to consciously avoid it. But the shooter had planned extensively for the violence at the Covenant School on Burton Hills Boulevard, police said. There were maps drawn of the school in detail of surveillance and entry points. The shooter, who was killed on the school's 2nd floor, had 2 assault-type rifles and a handgun. The 3 students killed are named here as well. And I don't know. I don't know what our policy is on that. I mean, do you want to memorialize their loss? Yes? No? There's no policy reason for not reading the names. I guess I'm feeling like I'll leave them alone at this point. But we'll see how the families react and what happens in the coming days. Okay, so they name all of the victims, the kids, the substitute teacher, the head of the school, the custodian, etc. Is there anything else that there's the chronology of the shooting. There's the fact that the police respond. Just by way of information on the size of the school, the Covenant School employs 33 teachers with an 8-to-1 student-to-instructor ratio, so a relatively small campus. On a normal day of class, 209 students and 42 staff members would be on campus. The school was founded in 2001 as a ministry of Covenant Presbyterian Church and shares the same address as the church. So in case you were wondering about the denominational connection, if any, there you have it. And then a trading of attacks about what you should and shouldn't be doing about gun control. It was pointed out to me the representative in Congress of the area is everybody's favorite new weirdo who also hasn't he been in the news lately for some fabulism in the wake of the George Santos revelations? We've been looking at 2 or 3 other members of Congress, freshman Republicans, who may also have been inflating various parts of their resume. Andy Ogles, I don't know how this is, Ogles, one of the new members, and I think we just read stories about him fairly recently. Anyway, that's his district, and of course he offers thoughts and prayers, etc., etc. But in the meantime, he's also one of those guys who sends out Christmas cards of his family all holding AR-15s. And gosh, what a surprise that there should be a shooting in his neighborhood. What a weird thing to have happen. All right. And of course, the NBC News story does note for context that the gunfire in Nashville, it's a massacre. You can go ahead and say so. But the gunfire, the thing that went on, we don't know how the guns fired, et cetera, et cetera. Gunfire in Nashville follows multiple shootings on campuses across the country. Just days ago, a 17-year-old person wounded 2 administrators at a Denver high school before he was found dead. In February, 3 students were fatally shot, of course, at Michigan State University. And in January, 2 students killed at a charter school in Des Moines, Iowa. No real let up in the pace of school shootings or mass shootings in general, of course. That comes as a surprise to no one, but just thought I'd sort of summarize the situation or borrow the summary of NBC News to give some context to what's going on. All right, let's see. A couple of other items tucked away in pocket, and we're getting close to our first break. There was something I put aside. Oh, yes, from the one of the reports on what was happening in Israel, which I'm sure is now outdated. But when I read this Haaretz report, oh, shoot, now it's gone because, of course, they only let you read it one time, so I'll have to look at the pocket version of it. If I recall correctly, after reading through the whole thing, I scrolled down to the bottom and I said, oh, that's kind of interesting. I should make note of that tomorrow. But, of course, you can't highlight on this thing. So what exactly was it that we were talking about? Let's see. Was this the one? I don't know, actually. There were probably at least there were definitely two articles, but I feel like I put one away and not the other. But now I can't recall what it was. I wish I had made notes to myself at the very least. I wish I could just highlight on these pages somehow. All right. Well, at any rate, as I recall, it was No, I don't think I'm able to pinpoint it here. Okay. Well, I think it might have been about the fights between various members of the far right parties and the far right coalition. But okay, I'll have to give it another look over the break to see if I can identify exactly what it was. All right, a little bit of disorganization here, and in fact, behind on the music by a second or two. So even though I made a nice smooth transition this morning with the music, not implementing my interim solution yet for the music, I just happened to, be able to handle it, manually instead of doing it automatically. Okay, we'll reorganize our thoughts, come back later. I'll check in on the timelines on social media to make sure I'm not missing some hints about awesome stories from the rest of you, and continue on after this.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I regret to inform you that I have not figured out exactly what what I had in mind. I was pretty sure it was from the Israel stories, and now I just can't identify what it was. And I knew it when I had it. I had it open, and I thought, I don't want to. I kept the article open all day, and now I'm just not sure whether I'm seeing the entirety of the article when I open it up in Pocket. But of course, it being my second or third look at this Haaretz article, it's just not clear whether they're showing me the whole thing or not. So, okay, I don't know. Dang. And it's not a long article, so, I skimmed over it just to see. I wish I could figure out what it was but it was something surprising, and I said, I should really add that to the mix. So, too bad for me. But I do think it was interesting to see the various, it does illustrate the various splits on the right, and because it's a short article that's being displayed, at least in the Pocket version of this piece, I thought I could throw it in there. Right. So, But it's all probably outdated at this point. So I don't know. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expected to announce Monday, and I don't know what happened. But there was, at play was a freeze to his government's plan to overhaul the judiciary and weaken the high court, Likud sources say. The embattled prime minister reportedly held discussions overnight about the possibility of freezing the judicial overhaul legislation after a nationwide wave of spontaneous protests broke out after he fired Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, or I don't know whether they say Gallant or whatever, who called on him to stop the legislative process. That's, I guess, what got him fired, but then got him unfired as... firing the defense minister, I think, probably just exacerbated the reluctance among members of the standing military and reservists to report for duty and report for additional training. They're obviously, for whatever reason, quite upset about it and quite uninterested in allowing the legislation to go forward. Netanyahu, ally and chairman of the ultra-Orthodox Shas party, Aryeh Deri, reportedly expressed support for halting the process, as did ministers Ron Dermer and Yoav Kish of Likud, who spoke to Netanyahu on the subject, according to a source in the party. Justice Minister Yariv Levin, however, threatened to resign if the legislation was halted. So, it's a bit of a mixed signals situation here from the ministers. Meanwhile, United Torah Judaism Party's Degel HaTorah faction expressed support for the prime minister and his decisions, while far-right coalition party Otzma Yehudit called on Netanyahu not to stop the legislation. Isaac Herzog, Israel's president, also called on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday to halt the judicial overhaul process. That's interesting. In addition to a slew of opposition voices, despite the news, the Knesset's Constitution Committee began discussions to advance the controversial judicial appointments law, which seeks to give the coalition control over the Judicial Appointments Committee ahead of its second and third readings. Now, I think at this point it cuts off. And my guess is that the important nugget that I wanted to share with you is only available via subscription at this point. And I don't know. I'll see if I can work around it by opening it up on a different computer. I wonder if just a different computer. I'm pretty sure it's probably controlled by my address, ISP address, rather than the computers and cookies itself. But let's just see if it opens up on this one. Yeah, maybe it is. Wow, they got a bad firewall. All right, good news for us, though, because that means I can continue with the Haaretz reading. Okay, great. All right. All right, so this will probably get me to where I was going. Where did we stop with this one? Here we are. Gallant's firing sparked spontaneous protests at what police said were 150 locations around the country, with demonstrators blocking roads and intersections and lighting bonfires. Hundreds of protesters clashed with police and attempted to break through barricades outside the prime minister's residence in Jerusalem. That sounds a little wacky. The country won't remain silent until all dictatorship laws have been abolished completely, protest leaders declared. Inside Netanyahu's Likud party, calls were growing for a freeze, including from Ron Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, and one of the Prime Minister's closest confidants, Economy Minister Nir Barkat, and Culture and Sports Minister Miki Zohar said they would back Netanyahu if he decided to halt the legislation. The judicial reform is needed, and we will carry it out, but not at the cost of a civil war, Barkat said. That sounds like a better trade, right? We support the legislation, but we'd rather not have a civil war. Me too. I mean, I don't support the legislation. I don't know anything about the legislation. Maybe I would. I don't know, but it doesn't sound like it's going well. Diaspora Minister Amichai Amichai Chikli, I guess, called for dialogue with the opposition. That always sounds good. Aryeh Deri, a key Netanyahu ally and head of the ultra-Orthodox Shas party, have they changed the editing of this piece now? Because we already went over this earlier. But he reportedly expressed support for halting the process. Anyway, we should keep scrolling because the thing I was interested in seems like it was at the bottom yesterday. Although who knows? Maybe they moved it to the top now. There's the president being mentioned here. Justice Minister Levin saying he would resign. I do think it's still down here. Finance Minister, we haven't heard from him. Bezalel Smotrich and his far-right religious Zionism party, although it could be Smotrich because it could be a European name. I don't know. Anyway, the religious Zionism party said, we cannot stop the legislation under any circumstances, warning that it would spark violence and anarchy, I guess, if you stopped. So that's an interesting spin on things. Though it's a little Trumpy at this point. I wonder if it's, if you prosecute me, if there's law and order, we'll have violence. Well, okay. But yeah, now that I think about it, I remember the name, or at least the first name of the person I was interested in finding the quote from was Boaz. I don't know, it stuck with me because I know a character from Fauda, right? We had a Boaz. So that's why it stuck in my head. We'll get there. Let's see. The coalition's other major far-right party, Otzma Yehudit, also called on Netanyahu to stay the course. Meanwhile, the Knesset's Constitution, Law, and Justice Committee had the deliberations. Okay. On Saturday, amid mass protests against the overhaul, Gallant called to freeze the legislation, citing risk to the army's readiness and the growing societal rift. After his ousting 24 hours later, the fallout from the decisive event spread beyond street protests and boycotts by army reservists. All of Israel's universities and many colleges announced they would suspend studies in a strike starting Monday morning against the continuation of this legislative process that undermines the foundations of Israeli democracy, in their view. We're getting there. Chair of Israel's General Federation of Labor, the country's largest association representing the majority of its trade unionists, warned the organization is preparing for a labor strike of historic proportions unless the overhaul plan is suspended immediately. This is a country of the citizens, all its citizens, not of the Kohelet or Policy Forum. Chairman Arnon Bar David declared in a dramatic speech, we will not allow the country's descent into the abyss. If the legislation isn't stopped, we're all going from here to a general strike in Israel. Where is Boaz? There he is down here. Ah, yes, now I remember. Here's the story. All right. It's more political wrangling, but then this one. Netanyahu's lawyer in Case 4000, which I assume is the case prosecuting him for the alleged corruption. This is the interesting thing. Netanyahu's lawyer is Boaz Ben Zur. And the lawyer informs Netanyahu, apparently, that he would no longer represent him in his criminal trial if the legislation is not halted. That was the interesting part. Yes, okay. Thankfully, I found my way back to that one. It's not a government minister threatening to resign. It's Netanyahu's criminal defense attorney saying, I can't help you if you overhaul the judicial system this way. Now, I should note at this point that I have had a couple of email letters of complaint from one of the very strongly, pro-Israeli government listeners who complains of Greg and I giving airtime to less conservative, opposition. I don't know whether he cares whether they're conservative or not, but opposition to Netanyahu's plan and consistently asking for, what's so wrong about this judicial overhaul plan? One of the things that it is looking for is giving more governmental or elected leaders, giving them more control over who gets nominated to and confirmed to the Israeli courts, which is very much like the American model. So what's the problem? Well, a couple of things, but as I understand it, that's not the entirety of the judicial overhaul situation. There are also other aspects to it, including the ones that Greg have mentioned, that would make it easier for Netanyahu to cause the courts to have to jettison the cases against him, which seems like, a little more worrisome than just overhauling who and how the to whom appointments are given and how they're handled. Has very little, if anything, to do directly with the question of, well, can he also dismiss corruption charges against himself? That seems like a bad idea. And then second of all, I think, it just doesn't stand. It was a bad comparison to compare the Israeli political landscape to the American political landscape and say, well, if it's good enough for America to appoint its judges this way, then it ought to be good enough for Israel to appoint its judges that way. It doesn't necessarily follow. There are two different political structures. They separate their powers in different ways. Their parliamentary system, not like us. And our system is no great shakes either. So I don't know. So, it's a wash as far as I'm concerned, just because I don't know enough about it as to how judges are appointed and confirmed. But I think most people's concerns lie elsewhere. And secondly, I guess I would just say, I don't know what to tell you. If you think that the protests against the overhaul are wrong-headed, talk to the hundreds of thousands of people who are in the street going on general strikes, members of the military, for God's sake, who are refusing to report for duty, which is, again, an existential threat to Israel. And they're just saying, we'd rather take that risk of existential threat than go forward with what we regard as this other existential threat. I don't know. They have that objection. I'm just telling you they have that objection. I mean, emailing me isn't going to send them home. And talking to them and telling them what's wrong with the way we appoint judges is probably going to get an eye roll. And then they'll walk right by you and go on with their general strike. They won't go home because you compare judicial nominations in Israel to judicial nominations in America. It's just not an apt comparison to them. And it's probably not the part of the law that they are protesting. My guess is that my guess is that the military protests probably have to do with, they're already walking a fine line about how they handle Palestinian citizens and non-Jewish Israeli Arab citizens, and the legal justification for IDF operations is tenuous in some cases at best, and they appreciate the very strong separation of powers when it comes to judicial powers in Israel, and anything that jeopardizes that makes them feel like they would be handed legal justification that wouldn't ring true to them when they're asked to put their lives on the line or extinguish the lives of others, and they're unhappy about that. And if these are the people taking up and bearing the arms in defense of Israel's existence, perhaps you ought to lend them an ear and not dismiss their concerns as, what's wrong with you? It's good enough for America. I don't know. I certainly don't have the answers. At this point, I'm literally just reading the reports, and that's all I can tell you. And venting to me isn't going to get you anywhere, but you're welcome to keep doing it. All I'm saying is Netanyahu's lawyer, in the middle of he's there and contracted and willing to offer a defense in his corruption trial, unless this bill goes forward, at which point he, as a lawyer, says, I'd rather just cut you loose and let you take your chances with somebody else than continue to defend you under this new judicial regime, which to me says something particularly significant, which is why I went looking for it and spent all this time on it. Other than that, I have nothing to tell you about what's going on in Israel, except that it sounds like it's pretty damn confusing. All right. Other things to share with you. I guess I didn't put as many things in pocket from this morning's news, mostly because I guess it was about the shooting and there was just no more that I felt like putting away or discussing about it. But in a completely different story, maybe, except that it might also involve separation of powers and power brokering and corruption here in the United States, I caught this story thanks to discussion of it on Mastodon this morning, and let's see if I can open up the Mastodon account here and scroll back and see which who was making which observation about this story about Ginni Thomas today. I'll see if there's a our friend Bobby Bigwheel retweeting this story along with the comment saying it's kind of funny that Ginni Thomas's husband, we're talking about Virginia Thomas here, Clarence Thomas's wife, that Ginni Thomas's husband has near absolute power to implement their cruel vision on the country, and she still wants to get paid $600,000 to do what? To forward Epoch Times articles to GOP staffers and ask what they're doing about it, which I guess is the bottom line of this story of her latest alleged corruption. Activist group led by Ginni Thomas received nearly $600,000 in anonymous donations. Funding for the group that battled, quote, cultural Marxism was channeled through right-wing think tanks, post-investigation finds. Whose investigation? Sean Boberg and Emma Brown, to be precise. A little-known conservative activist group led by Virginia, quote, Ginni Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, collected nearly $600,000 in anonymous donations to wage a cultural battle against the left over 3 years. A Washington Post investigation found. And you know what? She was going to do it for free. So what's the point? And the point is, I don't know, maybe her husband will give us what we want if we pump $600,000 into their home decoration fund or whatever you have going on there. The previously unreported donations to the fledgling group Crowdsourcers for Culture and Liberty, which basically gives away the game that they're not really doing anything in particular. They're crap posting on social media and wanting money for it. I mean, I want that too, but, I'm not getting it. And if I was, I guess I'd feel guilty about it. And that's the difference between me and Ginni Thomas. Anyway, wow, the ultra powerful and super useful Crowdsourcers for Culture and Liberty. These donations were channeled through a right-wing think tank in Washington. Imagine being a think tank. Well, what kind of things are you thinking about? We're thinking about giving away $600,000 to idiots. All right. I mean, you're supposed to be thinking. These are the unthinking. And you're just going to give away, the think tank is going to give away its money to unthinking meme crap posters. All right. Well, anyway, which one? Maybe we can find out here. A right-wing think tank in Washington agreed to serve as a funding conduit from 2019 until the start of last year. According to documents and interviews, I wonder why they changed their mind. Did the money run out, or do they just now is when they're caught and they're going to stop? The arrangement, known as a, quote, fiscal sponsorship, effectively shielded from public view details about Crowdsourcers' activities and spending, information it would have had to disclose publicly if it operated as a separate nonprofit organization, experts said. So, intentionally done. The Post's investigation sheds new light on the role of money from donors who are not publicly identified has played in supporting Ginni Thomas's political advocacy, which she shouldn't be doing, and has long been a source of controversy because she shouldn't be doing it. The funding is the first example of anonymous donors backing her activism since she founded a conservative charity more than a decade ago. She stepped away from that charity amid concerns that it created potential conflicts for her husband on hot-button issues before the court. So she stepped away from that one and started a new one with more shielding for the funding so that she could do the same thing and not be caught taking the money. What an honest person. Thomas's activism has set her apart from other spouses of Supreme Court justices, yes. She has allied with numerous people in groups that have interests before the court, and she has dedicated herself to causes involving some of the most polarizing issues in the country. I mean, kind of exactly the model that you shouldn't be following. In 2020, she privately pressed White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to pursue efforts to overturn the presidential election, which is really an indication that you've reached a level where you really, obviously there's just no limits on you whatsoever, and your husband should be impeached just to protect the country from you being a maniac. Of course, you could be doing this as a private citizen, but it means that much more when you do it because your husband is a Supreme Court justice, and we should have called an end to that. But anyway, So let's see. So she privately pressed to overthrow the government of the United States because she doesn't care about the Constitution and is an enemy of the state. Maybe some people would say. And she sent emails urging swing state lawmakers to set aside Joe Biden's popular vote victory in awarding electoral votes. When those efforts were revealed by the Post last year, they intensified questions about whether her husband should recuse himself from cases related to the election and attempts to subvert it. And in fact, it raises questions in my mind about whether her husband should recuse himself from cases involving the Constitution, which is everything that they do because he doesn't care to uphold it if he is in her thrall because she is anti-constitutionalist. There you have it. She would deny it, but she is wrong about that. In recent months, the High Court has faced increasing scrutiny over a range of ethical issues, including the lack of transparency surrounding potential conflicts of interest and a whistleblower's claim that wealthy Christian activists sought access to justices at social gatherings to shore up their resolve on abortion and other conservative priorities. In a brief statement to the Post, Mark Paoletta, a lawyer for Ginni Thomas, said she was, quote, proud of the work she did with crowdsourcers. She shouldn't be. I mean, not only because it was bad work, but because it was poorly done and stupid and unnecessary work, and really just designed to put money in the Thomases' pockets and thereby influence their decision-making. But never mind all of that. Thomas's lawyer says she's proud of the work that she did with this stupid-ass group, which brought together conservative leaders to discuss amplifying conservative values with respect to the battle over culture, which is not where she should be spending her time. Okay, anyway. She believes crowdsourcers identified the left's dominance in most cultural lanes, garbage talk, while conservatives were mostly funding political organizations. Paoletta wrote, in her work, she has complied with all reporting and disclosure requirements. It's treading a thin line there. He wrote, there is no plausible conflict of interest issue with respect to Justice Thomas. Yes, there is. A spokeswoman for the Supreme Court did not respond to questions for Clarence Thomas. In 2019, here's the story, anonymous donors gave think tank Capital Research Center, or CRC, $596,000 that was designated for crowdsourcers, according to tax filings and audits the think tank submitted to state regulators. The majority of that money, $400,000, was routed through, if you prefer, another nonprofit, Donors Trust, according to that organization's tax filings. Donors Trust is a fund that receives money from wealthy donors whose identities are not disclosed and steers it towards conservative causes. Like, why are there such organizations? And the answer is because conservative lawmakers get that money as payoffs to build statutes that permit this garbage. So, that's why they do it. The documents do not say how or whether the money was spent. It is not clear how much compensation, if any, Ginni Thomas received. CRC, which bills itself as an investigative think tank, it's an investigation tank then, is dedicated to uncovering anonymously funded influence campaigns by unions. How do you like that? Oh, and also environmental groups and other left-leaning nonprofits. So they don't disclose any of their donors, and their mission is to disclose the undisclosed donors of the left. And look away, nothing's going on here on the right. Among its trustees are Edwin Meese III, the conservative elder statesman, bound for the grave sometime soon, I'm sure. And former Attorney General, we all are, that's all I'm saying, former Attorney General of the Reagan administration. That's Edwin Meese, in case you were wondering. Its president is Scott Walter, not Scott Walker. Scott Walter, a former aide to President George W. Bush. Around the time CRC agreed to channel the anonymous donations to crowdsourcers, CRC signed a brief asking the Supreme Court to hear a case that conservative groups hoped would rein in fuel emission regulations in Oregon, records show. The court voted not to take up the case. As is routine, the votes of the individual justices, though, were not disclosed. Paoletta wrote that Ginni Thomas had no knowledge of or nor any connection whatsoever to an amicus brief CRC joined. Wink, wink, I guess. Walter did not respond to requests for comment. Meese said in a brief telephone interview that CRC's trustees agreed to the arrangement because Crowdsourcers, quote, was a group that had similar objectives and it was felt it would be helpful to them. Such arrangements are common among other nonprofits, experts said. Former CRC chairman Michael Frank told the Post that it was, quote, a courtesy for this group so that it could get going without having to start up on its own, something to ease the ability of this group to raise and use their money. Walter proposed the Crowdsourcers arrangement to the think tank's board members and mentioned Ginni Thomas's involvement. Wink, 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 Frank said. Let's see. Here's, I guess, what they're up to. Seeking culture warriors. On May 18th, 2019, Thomas told influential right-wing donors and activists about crowdsourcers in a private meeting. Video from the event shows the left, she said, was pushing, quote, cultural Marxism, whatever that might be, and eroding the pillars of our country. So we're going to erode the rest of them. We have some culture warriors, but we have a lot more to do. Another one of these people who thinks that it's the right losing the culture wars. Okay. Thomas said in this meeting of the Council for National Policy, remember them, in Northern Virginia, according to the video, which was obtained by the nonprofit watchdog, documented, and has been previously reported, conservatives and Republicans are tired of being the oppressed minority. Ha, ha, ha. The concept for crowdsourcers had been taking shape during discussions with 35 of the best thinkers about what the left is doing, she said. Thomas said partners in the effort included Cleta Mitchell, the crazy-ass lunatic attorney who should be indicted for her collaboration with Donald Trump in trying to overturn the 2020 election, and, of course, chair of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, which is itself a nonprofit that submits amicus briefs, mysteriously enough, to the Supreme Court in election law cases. Mitchell planned to establish a political action committee to, quote, protect President Trump, according to a slide Thomas displayed during the closed-door meeting. James O'Keefe, the founder of Project Veritas, recently booted, I think, right? Known for hidden camera stings that don't sting anybody, that aim to embarrass liberals, would lead an effort to, quote, protect our heroes. This does sound like an organized and well thought out grouping, don't you think? And so very, very necessary. All right, well, I'm about 5 seconds behind on the music, so we'll cut out at an odd place. But let's see, we'll throw in one more. Also involved is Richard Viguerie, who I believed was dead at this point, but apparently is not. A pioneer in conservative direct mail campaigns, and he would head up an effort to brand the left, she said. So super necessary work. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I intended to come in a little bit early because we left a little early in the music because of the lateness of getting it started. It was early because it was late. It was late. It was early. But the mute button would not cooperate. Did you need to know that? I don't know, but in the interest of full disclosure, there it is. So, okay, so what Ginni Thomas is putting together is basically, look, I like crap posting. I love tweeting memes. I love to more or less just yell and scream about things in social media. But I also would like to be able to put an army of people to work saying stuff that I think is necessary and trying to force the mainstream media to put it in their reports, and I like to get my people called for quotes. So we're going to pretend, one, that we have a real organization, two, that cultural Marxism is a real thing and we really have to fight it, and three, it's going to be fought on the terms of stuff I like. I like to go to the beach and crap post and tweet memes from the beach. Isn't there any way I could get $500,000 a year or so to do this? I mean, I have asked the same question. I wouldn't mind somebody passing that on and letting me have $500,000 to retweet things on Mastodon, but I guess what I got to do is put family members on the Supreme Court and start trying to exploit that in order to get. So, all right. How do I live my life? I love tweeting memes. Can I have $500,000 for that? if you have a husband on the Supreme Court, I guess the answer is yes. Oh, you have to be shameless too. I forgot about that part. So Mitchell, Cleta, said in a brief phone interview that she did not know anything about crowdsourcers and that nothing ever came of the Political Action Committee, but something did. Ginni has asked me over the years to do a lot of different things, she said. I always try to respond. O'Keefe and Vigary did not respond to requests for comment, although James immediately started filling a houseboat with dildos. I don't really know why he does that so often, but it's a thing that he does from time to time. Thomas described herself as having a key role in bringing crowdsourcers together. I'm not the answer person. If anyone knows me, you know this. I'm merely a convener, she said. I find the talent and I put them in a room and I help them talk to one another. So really, probably a lie, which, means she's undercrediting herself, but that's because she doesn't want to be caught doing things. But, maybe even if she's telling the truth about this, basically what she's saying is, I just like retweeting stuff, and I'm not the person who comes up with the stuff. I hire people for that, but then I see it and I go, hee, that's funny. It owns the libs. I'll retweet it. And again, I need to stress, isn't there a way to get $500,000 for this? And, she found it. She said the group was, quote, now under the Capital Research Center, though she did not mention the funding. It is not clear exactly when in 2019 the anonymous donations were made. Crowdsourcers had held its first meeting 4 months earlier at the Salamander Resort and Spa. I know the place, I've not been there, but I know where it is. It didn't matter whether I knew where it was or not, because the article goes on to say it's in Middleburg, Virginia. That's Loudoun County. Just, so you know. A 340-acre bucolic retreat with equestrian facilities. Attendees at the January 2019 meeting gathered for dinner and met in a conference room the next day, splitting into several groups, each dedicated to a theme, such as politics. That's a good theme for a meeting like that, don't you think? Or education. Or family. And the purpose being to brainstorm ways to counter the left, said a person who attended and spoke on a condition of anonymity to describe a private event. So, prominent people, rich people, people who are married to other prominent people, had a fancy dinner for themselves, and then they split up into groups. Let's brainstorm about stuff like, politics or family or education. Oh, you know what? I hate education. It's so stupid. They should get rid of a bunch of books. Did you know there's porn in books? And they should get rid of it. Yeah, I know, right? And porn is anti-family. So we're brainstorming family things now. That's right. Yes, and politics. We should tell our spouses, who are the people who hold votes or powerful positions, that we hate it when there's porn in books and it hurts families and they should get rid of that stuff. Yay, we did it. Now on to dessert. This is just sort of, and it's not that this only happens on the right, to be sure. Although I think probably the idea of, it is only something that happens on the right when it gets to the level of, who knows, some good idea might come of this brainstorming and this stupid approach to whatever. Won't you give us funding so that we can waste it on expensive dinners at resorts where we get around a table and say, you know what we should do? We should totally do a politics thing to make this happen. Yes. And there's no funding that on the left, generally speaking, except among the donor class, which gets together all the time and has dinner and says, we should do something about this. And the answer is usually, yes, let's deny funding to people with ideas about how to do it. And they then go ahead and do that. On the right, they say, let's pass money around to people who have no idea what they're doing and hope that things come out differently in the end. And but it ends up being effective because they say, well, the people who we give the money to don't know what they're doing, but they are related to or are sponsors of people who do know what they're doing, and they'll go ahead and take care of doing the stuff. And we stand around and say, we did that. And, that's life on the right, generally speaking. Members of this stupid group communicated through a private Google group, emails obtained by the Post show. The emails contained warnings not to share information that would reveal the identities of the group's members. In all caps, it says, absolutely do not forward emails from here without removing all identifying information from this listserv, warned one. Whoops, oh well. In February of 2019, Thomas's assistant emailed the Google group announcing the addition of new members, which is, exactly what they just said don't do. And the new members were they included, Charlie Kirk, the president of the pro-Trump student group Turning Point USA, and himself now a 35-year-old student leader. Larry Solov, chief executive of Breitbart News. I forgot who that was. And Alan West, the former Republican congressman from Florida, who then moved to Texas and who didn't do anything after that except yell about people. Thomas replied, "Welcome new leaders," with 3 exclamation points. And a heart over the I in her name. I not really. Anyway, both Thomas and her assistant used email addresses belonging to her for-profit, consulting business, Liberty Consulting. In that same message, Thomas wrote that she had been trying to raise money for crowdsourcers. "We had many great meetings with interested donors, but we don't yet have specific funding, or don't have specific funding yet. So prayers still needed." You could be praying for money the whole time. Thoughts and prayers for getting you money. Anyway, she added the crowdsourcers' next bi-weekly conference call would include a presentation from Steve Hantler, an advisor to Bernie Marcus, a Home Depot co-founder and major conservative donor. Hantler is listed as the principal officer in a nonprofit group called the Job Creators Network Foundation, its tax filing show. The group has in recent years asked the Supreme Court to strike down the Biden administration's student loan forgiveness program, for reasons unknown, except that they're conservative a-holes. Hantler declined to comment. Spokespeople for Kirk and West did not provide comment for this story. A spokeswoman for Solov said that sometimes Breitbart people get put on informational lists to know what people are thinking and doing. By late 2019, crowdsourcers had engaged Tim Clark, who spearheaded Trump's 2016 campaign in California, to serve as its national director. How'd they do in California, the Trump campaign? Just wondering. I mean, essentially, I know why they're sailing into headwinds, but essentially you are saying a guy who totally failed to win California for me, Donald Trump, should be put in charge of this effort, even though he's a total failure. That's the bottom line of it, right? Wasn't maybe his fault, but that is the bottom line of it. In an email obtained by the Post, Clark issued an invitation to a March 2020 public launch of the group, but then, of course, there was a pandemic, so I don't know what happened with that one. He made clear that crowdsourcers did not have the money to pay for members' travel and lodging for the event, which was to be held in Washington. The launch was scheduled for March 6th, 2020. Ahead of the pandemic, I guess. Culture Summit 2020 will focus on the left's escalating war across American culture and how we go on offense to better preserve America's liberties for another generation, read the invitation obtained by the Post. It's not clear whether the meeting, which would have taken just as the nation was beginning to grapple with the spread of the coronavirus, was held as planned. Clark did not respond to a request for comment. Next up, a temporary accommodation. CRC's funding relationship with crowdsourcers continued through the end of 2021, records show. The relationship was described in CRC tax filings as a fiscal sponsorship arrangement. Under such agreements, an existing charity houses a startup group with a similar mission until the smaller group gets off the ground. I can see the need for that, legitimately. In its tax filings, the think tank wrote that it provided fiduciary oversight, financial management, and other administrative services to help build the capacity of crowdsourcers. The filings describe crowdsourcers as an informal, unincorporated, nonprofit association which serves as an incubator for ideas across a network of conservative leaders, cultural entrepreneurs, and cultural influencers. Kind of a bit of gobbledygook. And I don't even know what a informal, unincorporated nonprofit association is. I mean, if you're nonprofit, that's one thing. But I mean, you don't make a profit, that's one thing. But being a nonprofit organization, donations to you are tax deductible, there really can't be unofficial nonprofit status in that sense. Anyway, Frank, the former CRC chairman, said the idea didn't seem like it was particularly controversial when it was presented to the board for approval. It was maybe putting some money in one of our accounts to make it easier to access it, he said. It was presented to us as a courtesy, something that was more of a temporary accommodation. Frank said the think tank had no role in raising the $596,000 that it channeled to crowdsourcers. Just showed up one day. What can I tell you? Crowdsourcers was never established as an independent nonprofit group, by the way, according to a search of an IRS database. So, it's like 5 years into it. They haven't bothered to do the paperwork. Philip Hackney, the former IRS attorney who is now an associate law professor at the University of Pittsburgh, says such arrangements are not uncommon or improper. Well, the original arrangement anyway. He said they do allow the startup group to avoid having to disclose information that independent nonprofits must usually reveal in annual tax filings, such as its officers or details about its spending. You would be able to keep names and salaries off any documents, he said. Very important to Ginni Thomas, apparently. Indeed, Thomas's title in crowdsourcers is not a matter of public record and could not be determined. CRC's annual audits show that the $596,000 dedicated to crowdsourcers was released from donor restrictions over 3 years, meaning donors' conditions on how it could be spent had been satisfied or lifted, experts said. About $207,000 for crowdsourcers was released in 2019, $85,000 in 2020, and the remaining $303,000 in 2021, the audits show. CRC's most recent tax filings in 2021, obtained by Documented, said it had ended its agreement with crowdsourcers at the close of that year. Next section, an intersection with the court. In 2019, the year the funding arrangement began, a trade group that represents industrial companies, the American fuel and petrochemical manufacturers, had unsuccessfully sued Oregon over a program that regulates how fuels are produced and transported. On February 8th of that year, CRC joined free market groups, including the Cato Institute and the Pacific Legal Foundation, in an amicus brief urging the Supreme Court to reconsider lower court decisions upholding the program. Is the Pacific Legal Foundation affiliated with Claremont Institute and John Eastman? I can't recall. We'll see whether that comes up in the story. In the meantime, you all can Google that for me and see what you think. It was the only time CRC, founded in 1984, has filed a brief with the court in recent decades, according to Supreme Court records dating to 2001. For the court to hear a case, at least 4 justices must agree, and on May 13, 2019, the court declined to hear the case. The fact that CRC filed an amicus brief before the Supreme Court around the same time that it was supporting the work of crowdsourcers, Ginni Thomas's group, does not on its own present a conflict of interest that would have required Clarence Thomas to recuse himself, according to Stephen Gillers, a legal ethics expert at New York University. If Ginni Thomas was paid for her work with crowdsourcers, either directly or through her consulting firm, then there could be a recusal issue depending on the size and timing of the payment, Gillers said. All federal judges, including Supreme Court justices, are required to recuse themselves in certain circumstances, including when they or their spouses have a financial interest in a party before the court, or when a reasonable person might question their impartiality. But because the Supreme Court sits atop the judiciary, there is no higher court to review each justice's recusal decisions, which I was going to say, but I'm glad they put it in an organized fashion. In layman's terms, it means that a Supreme Court justice, let's say Clarence Thomas, could say, all right, I'm required to recuse where there's a conflict of interest. Well, F it. I think there's no conflict of interest. And there's just nobody to review that and say, well, there is. I mean, you're wrong about that because they're the Supreme Court. There's no Supreme Court to review the decisions of the Supreme Court. That's the whole point of their being supreme. Except if they're in New York State, in which case the Supreme Court isn't supreme at all, but you get the idea. We've been over that. So basically it's just, well, no one can say I'm wrong if I just say the outcome I want is the answer. Egalitarian approach to this whole thing. I don't want to recuse myself, because if I recuse myself, people will stop paying my wife to influence me. And this is the way we make extra money. Let's say that's happening, and that's the calculus, right? There isn't anybody except, the Congress, which could theoretically, but not really, impeach him. There's no check on that. But just because they don't have the political will to check him doesn't mean the check doesn't exist. And so therefore we all say, yeah, we got a system of checks and balances in this country. All right. Gillers said ordinary Americans might find it puzzling that one half of a married couple is at the ramparts on political issues, sort of, and that then get translated into legal issues that her husband has to decide. But there is no rule prohibiting that, he said, and it's not clear how one could be crafted. Ginni Thomas has long maintained that she and her husband keep their careers separate. Yeah, right. I can guarantee that my husband has never spoken to me about pending cases on the court. Well, he doesn't speak to other members of the court about pending cases on the court. So that's no miracle. It's an ironclad rule in our house, which also, by the way, could be a total lie, but doesn't really matter. She told congressional investigators last year who were examining the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Additionally, he's uninterested in politics. That can't be true. And I generally don't discuss with him my day-to-day work in politics. Controversy over Ginni Thomas's political activism dates back to at least 2010, after she founded the nonprofit Liberty Central to harness the energy of the then burgeoning Tea Party movement. Harness the energy. That is to say, harvest the money of the then burgeoning Tea Party movement. Though she described Liberty Central as, quote, nonpartisan, and that could never be true, and focused on the principles of the founding fathers, and there's no way you could know whether you were doing that correctly, she spoke even then about, quote, activating a community of grassroots patriots, unquote, to wage a cultural war. I want to get paid for trading memes and kind of feeling like maybe I'm doing something, and it should be grassroots work, because if it was official kind of work, like legal work or legislative work, there would have to be a record of accomplishment and achievement. Whereas here I can just say, I didn't get anything done because it's grassroots. And you know how it is at grassroots. We don't have rules about how stuff gets done. So, the end. Give me the money. It's time to wake up and refocus. Just like in a farm setting, about which she may or may not know anything, we need to till the ground, plant the seeds, tend the crops, and pray for rain before we can harvest the crops or get a hose. She said that year in a speech to the Conservative Political Action Conference. That's interesting. She would say, what a great Freudian slip that was. Because my quote is, the left has been tending their crops, you guys. But you said the theft, and that's because the left are thieves. That's right. Whereas I maintain that the Freudian slip was she's thieving the money and all of this. So the theft comes out. Anyway, she says the left has been tending their crops. I'm not so sure. It has occurred in high schools, in K through 12 textbooks, in colleges, in Hollywood, in mainstream media, in our churches, in our government. We've been asleep. Aye. Ginni Thomas launched Liberty Central with an anonymous donation, that seems to be her pattern, of $500,000 and another $50,000. That's $550,000. Sparking questions about potential conflicts of interest for her husband. Happens a lot with her. It's weird. Months after the launch, Politico reported that the $500,000 investment had come from Harlan Crow, a Texas real estate magnate and major donor to conservative candidates and causes, who had also given Clarence Thomas, here you go, here's a Bible. But it's a Bible worth $19,000 that had once belonged to Frederick Douglass, according to the justice's financial disclosures. Amid those questions, Ginni Thomas stepped away from Liberty Central in November of 2010. She went on instead to establish Liberty Consulting. Different. Because Liberty Consulting is a for-profit firm, it is subject to fewer public reporting requirements. Little is known about the firm's clients, besides those that have listed payments to Liberty in required disclosures. A nonprofit called the Center for Security Policy, which filed an amicus brief with the court in 2017 in support of the Trump administration's Muslim ban, reported on its tax filings that it paid Liberty Consulting a total of $236,000 in 2017 and 18. The New Yorker first reported last year. A political action committee run by Richard Viguerie, the crowdsourcers member and direct mail pioneer, also reported paying Liberty $5,000 in 2018 for video production. As a Supreme Court justice, Clarence Thomas must list sources of his wife's income on annual financial disclosure forms, but not the amount. That doesn't seem particularly sensible. Since 2018, he has reported that Liberty Consulting was the sole source of income for his wife, and that the firm paid her a salary, won't tell you what it is, and benefits, won't tell you what they are. Clarence Thomas is not required to report the firm's clients. So that's the end of the article, but it lays out a pretty good foundation of, kind of what is going on here and where she's getting her funding. And we're all supposed to wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and pretend that it has nothing to do with Clarence Thomas, even though I think it's clear implication of the article that it does. All right, let's see. Oh, it's coming up on the bottom of the hour, and I need to let everybody know that usually at this point on a Tuesday, we are anticipating a call-in the last segment from Joan McCarter. She was on vacation last week, but feeling under the weather this week. And, the weather is a major factor there in the Pacific Northwest, and it's easy to get under it, I guess. I don't know. All right. So anyway, hopefully she'll be feeling better soon and can resume all of I think she's already resumed all the duties at Daily Kos, which actually, pays her to do those duties. So it's kind of an important thing. I know she's got some stories up already, and things I wanted to discuss. Maybe we'll have to have a read through them in the next segment. If we can't have Joan, we can have the next best thing and discuss the stories that she's been writing about. But without violating any federal laws about the health status or anything like that, just, not up to it today, and that's fine. Radio, spoken medium, so if you're not feeling great, it comes through, and we wish her the best. But anyway, too bad, bit of a disappointment there. But go to radio time with the guests you don't have, not the guests you thought you were going to have or wish to have at a later date. I don't know. I'm trying to hammer that into shape for public consumption, but it's not working. All right. Let's see. Other things to share with you that are short enough that we can fit them in before the break. Gosh, I don't know. We're going to have to go all the way back in pocket here and see what we've got. There's lots of long reads to share. And then, of course, all of what Joan's been writing about lately. Ah, yes. You know what? Here's an interesting one. Something that Greg shared over the weekend via social media, which I thought was of some interest. He grabbed the tweet of Sean Pierce, who is, executive producer on the Randy Rhoads radio show, among many other things. And noting here this story on Fox News, which reports that George Mason University students here in Virginia, George Mason University students launch a petition against hosting Governor Glenn Youngkin as commencement speaker. We're talking here, of course, about the undergrads, and of course, soon they'll be overgrads, I guess. They're graduating this May, I assume. And commencement speaker is the governor. Ordinarily, a nice big score, even if most kids don't really particularly care that much about hearing from their governor. But Glenn Youngkin, a bit of a controversial figure, especially at George Mason University. Now, what makes it interesting is, as Sean notes here, he says, it should be noted that George Mason University is in Virginia and is generally considered a bastion for right-wingers. I would asterisk that. We'll get back to it in a second. So, when even the righties don't want Glenn Trumpkin, get it, giving their commencement speech, that's news. Well, Greg passed that one along because it's, of course, happening here in Virginia and involves our governor, who I'm not a big fan of, and involves, I don't know if you remember this part, George Mason, which is At least, I mean, in the graduate school sense, and my alma mater. I graduated from the George Mason University School of Law, which has since been renamed the Antonin Scalia School of Law, and then they renamed it again so that they wouldn't have an acronym that looked a little bit like a-hole. So Antonin Scalia as School, AS, Antonin Scalia School of Law, ASSOL. You remember that story. Anyway, I wanted to note this for the record. We can read the story, although the story is a little bit less important. I want to add the asterisk to Sean Pierce's observation. When you say that George Mason University is generally considered a bastion for right-wingers, it should be noted that it is considered a bastion for right-wing professors, but also a very specific group of the professors. The law professors are pretty conservative. The economics professors are known to be fairly conservative. But basically, the class of professors whose comments are frequently sought on political articles from the newspapers tend to be the more conservative. The student body at George Mason University is very, very different from the faculty there. It is, the largest student body of any public university in Virginia. Don't know if you knew that. And second, by far, the most diverse. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just because we were running out of time before the break doesn't mean I have to stop discussing this, right? I just wanted to point out. So, yes, George Mason University, very, very different place if you're talking about the undergraduate students on its campus in Fairfax, Virginia, which should also give you a hint about what's going on here, and its faculty, which really the law faculty is among the most conservative. To some extent, the economics faculty, as I mentioned before, and sometimes they cross over because the School of Law, of course, teaches what is known in the biz, I guess, if the biz is law schools, as the law and economics curriculum, which, by the way, is the CRT of the left, or of the right, I guess I would say, or maybe of the left, because you can just label it whatever you want. If you're labeling the other side, the left should be labeling law and economics, the CRT as practiced by the right. In other words, it is an advanced legal doctrine that is very conservative in its approaches. I don't know if I have the time or the ability to fully explain what's going on here, but those of you who are longtime listeners will recognize the terminology of law and economics. But anyway, the law school is quite conservative. And I should point out the law school, by the way, doesn't share a campus with the main undergraduate campus in Fairfax. Most of the graduate work is done there too, but the law school is headquartered in Arlington, Virginia. But that's really the point. Both Arlington and Fairfax are pretty substantial democratic strongholds for the most part, and not at all Youngkin territory. Youngkin still got pretty well clobbered in Arlington, Fairfax, and Loudoun, as I frequently point out. And that's where the vast majority of the student body for GMU comes from. It's a state school, so it's mostly in-state students. They do draw from outside of the state, of course, or the Commonwealth, if you prefer. But it's a pretty northern Virginia oriented school. We, in our family, we're right in the middle of the end of, I guess, the college selection process. And Virginia being what it is, we offer a fairly robust selection of very good public universities with a variety of different approaches to education. And Florida, in many ways, modeling their latest offerings after, now changing direction for the new college. But Virginia offers a really great range of public universities of different sizes and approaches. There are those which more closely resemble smaller liberal arts colleges than enormous public universities. There's, of course, the University of Virginia, which isn't that enormous, and Virginia Tech, which is, I think, more enormous. Then, of course, there are other public universities of considerable size: James Madison University, George Mason University in the northern half of the state. There are many others elsewhere. Christopher Newport University, which itself is a little bit more like a smaller liberal arts college. The point is that you can go to anything from a enormous, huge campus university like Tech, which is, of course, focused on the tech, or the University of Virginia, more of an elite type school, but still a public university at that. Then there's George Mason, lesser known, but as it turns out, I think the largest of the public university undergraduate student bodies in the state. And as I said, very diverse, drawing from all over the state. But because it's located in Northern Virginia, if you visit the campus and spend some time there, you will see very quickly. It really only takes a few minutes of walking around to notice how diverse the student body is. And I mean, I've visited the other schools now, and I've been to UVA, and while it's got a diverse student body, it's not nearly as quickly, you won't see as diverse a student body as quickly as you will anywhere, as you will on the George Mason campus. Very considerable Black student population, very considerable Asian student population, South Asian, East Asian. It's a big mix, and it's a very diverse area, and that's why. And so it doesn't surprise me. It also is quite obvious, at least when you're making a visit for a prospective student day kind of thing, or a recruiting day, open house, where the student activity groups are out in force and tabling and trying to interest both students and prospective students alike. There's also a considerable contingent of LGBTQ students, not only organized as, by, and for LGBTQ students, but also a significant presence in otherwise things that have nothing to do with gender or sexual orientation stories, but they just have so much of a presence that they're a part of every group, as is always the case with everything. But I don't know, it was just that much more open and obvious and great, because it felt comfortable both for them and for the prospective and current students. You just happened to notice that was the case. And if you had done the same, then it wouldn't have surprised you at all to have heard this story. And I mean, the story is a basic one and a not uncommon one, wherein the students say, hey, we got a governor who essentially denies our basic right to exist, whether as LGBTQ students or, for that matter, as minority students, and who is fighting the wrong kind of a fight for progressive education in the future of Virginia, and we don't really want to hear from him, and we think he undermines the values we've been absorbing at the university to this point, and don't want to hear from him. I don't know that they'll succeed in changing it. I mean, he is the governor, and it's a public university, and the powers that be at the university know very well how limited their flexibility will be in denying a forum to the governor. But, and also I should point out the story was being reported on Fox News' website. And so, never read the comments anywhere, but definitely don't read them at Fox News. Won't tell you much. But I really wanted to speak more to Sean Pierce's point that the GMU is a bastion for right-wingers. It's among the professorship, not necessarily among the student body, at least not among the undergraduates. So a little bit of nuance to that story that I thought I would deliver by having been on the ground for many aspects of this story. Okay, let's see. It being ordinarily Joan McCarter Day, Joan McCarter time, I thought I would change directions and have a look at what her headlines are and see which ones we wanted to dive into and talk about in her absence. Let's see. First at the top of the list, her latest offering, North Carolina finally expands Medicaid. I mentioned that was, I think, yesterday part of the topics addressed in Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy the other day. Is that right? Or do I misremember? Anyway, North Carolina finally expands Medicaid just in time for a massive drop-off in enrollments. Oh, boy. Well, hopefully that trend can be reversed by opening things up there in North Carolina. Let's see. So we could dive in and find out what's driving that. Other headlines. Just want to give you a sampling of Joan's headlines. House GOP, GOP, looks to use Manchin, that is Senator Manchin, of course, from the other body, in their debt limit hostage taking. We really do need to get up to speed on that. Oh, yes, and I noticed in this story yesterday that it was illustrated with a photo of Joe Manchin side by side with Susan Collins, who no doubt thinks at this point that Donald Trump, who continues to turn up the heat on his violent rhetoric, has learned his lesson. I don't know. Nobody has asked her lately whether or not that's the case, but, she'll probably stick by that. And let's see, going back a little, no, not that much further. It's just yesterday. Sorry, Monday. That seems like ancient history. The Senate is finally ready, mostly, to admit the nation's 20-year-old mistake in Iraq. The Senate getting set to adopt legislation that would repeal, the 20-plus-year-old authorization for the use of military force, which they rightly feel has been abused in the years since as justification for all sorts of other things, which I guess indicates that it's outlived its usefulness. And, of course, Republicans insist they want to, quote, save Social Security. But like most GOP stories, that's a lie. But that brings us all the way back to March 17th, prior to her vacation break. All right, so let's see. What shall we dive into? Any number of things, but why not use, I don't know. Gosh, we really should cover all of these things, obviously. Let's get up to date on the debt limit hostage taking by taking a quick look at what Joan shared on that subject yesterday. Writing, it looks like the House GOP has cried uncle on using the debt ceiling as leverage to enact massive social spending cuts. Perhaps. But even in the immediate aftermath of a banking crisis that had still not contained, SVB and others, the most radical House Republicans want to play fast and loose with the global economy, good idea at this point, by threatening a default. This time, however, they're narrowing in on something that they think they can get a Democrat, that being Senator Joe Manchin, to help them with. This is while the international banking system is already shaky. Germany's Deutsche Bank is the latest problem bank, aren't they always? with shares falling on the world exchanges last week. That's just after Swiss bank Credit Suisse was forced into a sale to UBS last week. Bond markets are in turmoil, and a recession might be just around the corner. So no, this isn't the best time for the GOP to flex its burn it all down ethos. Nonetheless, they are still making hostage demands. The latest, quote, mainstream idea goes beyond budget demands to incorporate a, quote, reform in the energy permitting process. Of course, that would be the thing they would leverage in all of this. Speeding up gas and oil projects by limiting environmental review. It's being pushed by a big chunk of GOP lawmakers, including the chair of the Republican Policy Committee, Gary Palmer of Alabama, who's on barely Speaker McCarthy's leadership team. I think permitting's got to be part of the debt limit discussion, he told Politico, which really they have nothing to do with one another, but that's what they seek to take hostage. So, or to gain in the hostage trade. They would take the economy hostage and only release it if they got their way on oil and gas drilling, which really has nothing to do with anything. The hard right Republican Study Committee, with 175 members, has it at the top of their list of priorities in the debt limit demands. It has tons of momentum, says Representative Kevin Hern of Oklahoma, the chair of the RSC. That's certainly pro-growth to keep our jobs here and have less dependency on foreign governments and don't send money elsewhere, which by itself is a good thing. But, there are other ways to get yourselves free of dependence on foreign oil and gas. It could be that you free yourself of dependence on foreign oil and gas, or you could work to free yourself of dependence on oil and gas, foreign or otherwise, which would probably be a better idea, but not for them because their donors all own oil and gas interests. So you can see where that's going from a Republican point of view. One very big motivator, Joan writes, for this is the opportunity it provides for trolling President Biden and Senate Democrats because of Manchin, who made his own permitting threats last year to a must-pass government funding bill. He lost that round of the fight and gave himself a petulant self-pity party in a statement that accused his colleagues of helping Putin, which, of course, I guess as long as you're dependent on foreign oil and gas, you would be helping Putin. And one way of not helping Putin, again, is get off the oil and gas, because that's all Putin has to offer. You could, of course, offer a different source for oil and gas, but why do that when you're murdering the planet on top of possibly helping Putin? And by the way, if you say instead, well, we're not going to pay Putin, we're going to develop domestic sources of oil and gas. What's the Russian response to that? Well, if they're not going to buy Russian oil and gas, but only going to buy American, quote unquote, American oil and gas, why don't we buy up or invest in, quote unquote, American oil and gas producers and get paid that way? Well, that's very devious. How could you get around that? Stop buying oil and gas. Now, could Putin then invest in American development of solar and alternative energy? I guess that's true. He could. But if he did that, he would be doing the world a favor, and we'd, be less inclined to be angry, I suppose, about money flowing to him that way. I guess you could try and, separate him from those interests, and you ought to try too, but I don't know. I guess at least if it was less damaging to the environment along the way, you'd have time to complete the project of unwinding Putin's influence in American-owned alternative energy. Whereas if you were busy trying to unwind his interest in oil and gas, but still producing that oil and gas, we all burn to death, maybe just after we get the project of unwinding him done. Anyway, it could segue into a different direction later on, let's say. All right, so Joan continues here saying, oh, yes, right, that's certainly pro-growth. Keep our jobs here, less dependency on foreign governments, don't send money elsewhere. One very big motivator for this is the opportunity it provides for trolling Joe Biden and Senate Democrats because of Manchin, right? Okay. Oh, we actually all read all this part here. Then we were noting that he had Manchin held a petulant self-pity party that accused his colleagues of helping Putin. A failed vote on something as critical as comprehensive permitting reform only serves to embolden leaders like Putin who wish to see America fail, he complained, although nobody was able to follow the logic. That was when Senate Republicans were still mad at Manchin for helping pass the Inflation Reduction Act just a few weeks earlier. They had been counting on him to help them scuttle the IRA reconciliation bill, which could pass with just Democratic votes at the time. And when he didn't, Mitch McConnell got his retribution by helping block his pet project of permitting reform. Manchin, why he's not mad at Republicans for that, I don't know. Manchin's proposal would have put limits on the review process for new projects under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, N-E-P-A, limiting the process to just 2 years. It would also provide a deadline for opponents of projects to bring court challenges and to prioritize fossil fuel energy projects, which is, completely upside down and backwards at this point. He also tried to force the Biden administration into approving completion of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, a controversial 300-mile natural gas pipeline that extends from West Virginia to regular old Virginia. Of course, Manchin isn't going to drop the issue. He's been working with Representative Bruce Westerman of Arkansas, the chair of the House Committee on Natural Resources, about including his proposals in the GOPS big energy bill, the bill the Senate won't take up and the White House has promised to veto. So great vehicle there. So here's the GOPS chance to troll some more using Manchin. He's already given McCarthy an assist, meeting with him to talk debt ceiling back in January, after Biden and other Democrats made clear that they would not be negotiating. A few weeks later, Manchin wrote a scolding op-ed in the Washington Post blaming both sides and playing the deficit peacock. He's running for re-election this year, so his pipeline, or I guess next year, and his permitting reform bill are high on his priority list. That makes him once again a useful tool for the House GOP. Whether the Senate GOP is willing to forgive and forget isn't so clear, nor is whether Manchin is egotistical enough to threaten the global economy over his own self-interests. Yeah, probably. It's just barely springtime in an off year, but there's been loads of election news lately. Now plugging the very excellent co-hosts of the Down Ballot podcast, David Neer and David Byrd, and their roundup of political developments in the electoral sphere. Okay, so we've covered all the bases there from that particular story. Do we want to then get to some of the other, maybe a related story, and maybe giving us a chance to segue into something that we definitely don't have all the time we need to cover, but could be something we stretch out over several days. Let's start with this other article. The Senate is finally ready, mostly, to admit the nation's 20-year-old mistake in Iraq, Joan also wrote yesterday. 20 years after the fact, and this has been a story that I've been holding on to in pocket for some time too, but let's have Joan's take on it. 20 years after the fact, the Senate is facing up to the fact that the U.S. Congress was duped by the lies of George W. Bush and his administration into a prolonged, destructive, devastating war in Iraq. Well, some senators anyway. They will finally vote this week to revoke 2 authorizations to use military force, under the acronym of AUMF, of course, both in Iraq and in the Gulf region generally. Those senators who were in Congress at the time are reflecting back on the momentous decision they took to send the nation to war. There was not enough information to persuade me, gotta jump back here, to persuade me that Iraq, in fact, had any connection to what happened on September 11th, or that there was a justification to attack, Senator Debbie Stabenow told the AP recently. I really thought about the young men and women that we would be sending into battle, she said. I have a son and a daughter. Would I vote to send them to war based on this evidence? In the end, the answer for me was no. Senator Ed Markey was in the House on October 11th, 2012, when they took this vote. He voted for the resolution and now says that vote was premised on the biggest lie ever told in American history. In retrospect, I regret relying upon the voices pushing war, he said. It was a mistake to rely on the Bush administration for telling the truth. Well, we told them so repeatedly. Senator Chuck Schumer, now majority leader, said the destruction of the World Trade Center and the havoc wreaked on New York City made him give the president the benefit of the doubt. He won't go so far as to say his vote was a mistake, that he was lied to. Of course, with the luxury of hindsight, it's clear that the president bungled the war from start to finish and should not have ever been given that benefit, Schumer said in a statement. Now, with the war firmly behind us, we're one step closer to putting the war powers back where they belong, in the hands of Congress. Maybe. Anyway, even GOP Senator Chuck Grassley has rethought his vote and is ready to repeal it, though he manages to excuse his mistake. All of us that voted for it probably are slow to admit that the weapons of mass destruction the Bush officials centered their war push on were a fiction. There was reason to be fearful of Iraq, Grassley continued, because he just can't admit to himself that he was lied to by Bush's team. Senator Lindsey Graham, who never met a war he didn't like, was one of the couple dozen votes against bringing this repeal to the floor. He's blasé about the thousands of American lives sacrificed in this war, much less the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. What can you say 20 years later? He asked rhetorically. Intelligence was faulty. That's an understatement, but he made sure to add that he recently told Bush that it was the right thing to do. I told him, Mr. President, Iraq has not retreated from democracy, Graham said. It has been imperfect, but if at the end of the day Saddam Hussein is eliminated and a democracy takes its place that can work with the United States, that was worth it. It turned out to be in America's interest. And what would it take to preserve a democracy that's in America's interest here at home? Well, I'm just mentioning the fact that they hanged Saddam Hussein. So, that seemed to have worked out pretty good. I guess in Lindsey Graham's eyes, that helped establish and preserve democracy in Iraq. And we're having trouble maintaining our democracy here. And it's largely the fault of former President Donald Trump. And, they hanged the president of Iraq, things happen, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. I'm just saying, also Romania managed to handle things just fine when their megalomaniac dictator was executed as well. And I'm not saying they're doing great with democracy necessarily in Romania, but they're doing better than they were before. And really all I'm saying here is what Benjamin Franklin said when they were framing out the Constitution, that there had to be a real and robust possibility that criminal and corrupt presidents would be 1, impeached, 2, removed from office, 3, barred from future service in office, and that if you can't do that, and you can't really depend on it being available as a remedy, well, then all that's left to you is remedies like they had to resort to in Iraq and Romania. And to the extent that you think America is exceptional and doesn't need to resort to those sorts of solutions, well, then use the political devices that are given you. If you refuse to use them on a partisan and political basis, well, people are going to take other measures instead. But that's not what Joan's writing about. She's writing about the AUMFs, of course. One House Republican who fought in Iraq for 7 years and was wounded twice disagrees, I guess, with Senator Graham here. Representative Corey Mills of Florida is ready for it to end. The AUMFs have been purposely misused for what was not their intended purpose, he said. It is also a direct abdication of our roles and responsibilities to let these AUMFs continue, Mills said. I can tell you right now that I'll be happy upon repeal. So far, it looks like there won't be a significant opposition in the House to repealing the 2 AUMFs for the 1991 Gulf War. Yes, that is still in effect, and the 2002 Iraq War. What won't be happening is a repeal of the 2001 AUMF, the one passed just weeks after the 9/11 attack, which has been used dozens of times in the past 2 decades in military actions all over the globe. Senator Rand Paul offered an amendment last week to repeal that one, but it only got 9 votes. This is, of course, the political or legalistic underpinning of the global war on terror, which I guess still continues. And by the way, it's I can connect it to the first or one of the earlier discussions in the show, the Israel discussion. This is the legal underpinning for our ability to strike militarily where ISIS is involved or anybody is involved, wherever the American intelligence and defense communities agree that a terrorism threat to the United States arises, whether it's, I don't know. It doesn't really matter where, when or where it arises worldwide. It's a global war on terror. And, that's a little shaky, but that's the legal underpinning that members of our military depend on for legal justification for their launching drone strikes or whatever methodology they may use to deliver forward American power against what they think have reasonably been concluded to be terroristic threats. But if you shifted all of that, if you took away that legal justification or made it so easy to get that it was just basically considered to be a rubber stamp issued by the judiciary, if we were asking them to independently uphold the legality of an AUMF, and they just did it as a matter of course because they depended for their jobs on the political actors that passed AUMFs, then members of our military might not feel all that at ease with the decisions. I don't know. Maybe they'd go along with it anyway. But I think that's essentially what members of the military in Israel are feeling. Not exactly a perfect parallel, of course, because we're two very different systems. Anyway, let's see. Probably not much momentum there for repealing the 2001 AUMF, but the other bills appear to be advancing in both houses, and we'll see where they go. We don't have time to get into the other aspect of Gulf politics, which is still looming out there, which we haven't paid any attention to, and my brother Mark brings that to our attention. We really do need to take a look at the deal recently reached between Iran and Saudi Arabia, Sunni and Shia coming together.
Radio.com.
We'll have to figure out what that means.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
But that's a big topic, and as you can hear, we're out of time for today. Time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what's up about this one. Let's see. New Jersey will take over the Patterson Police Department a month after city cops killed a well-known crisis intervention worker. Yikes. Let's look into that and more next.